Have you ever wondered what battles rage in the heavens above us? What cosmic wars unfold beyond the veil of human sight? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most spine-chilling encounters ever recorded in sacred text. A battle so fierce, so terrifying, that it shook the very foundations of creation itself. Most people think they know about spiritual warfare. They've heard of Michael the Archangel, of Satan's rebellion, of demons cast down from heaven. But what if I told you there's a battle more ancient, more devastating than anything you've ever imagined? A confrontation between an angel of unimaginable power and a primordial beast so monstrous that even the word terrifying falls short. This isn't just another Sunday school story. This is the account of Raguel, the angel of justice, and his earth-shattering battle against Leviathan, the serpent of the deep. A creature so massive that when it moves, the very oceans tremble, so powerful that its breath could melt mountains, so ancient that it remembers the first day of creation. Why have you never heard this story before? Because some truths are too dangerous to speak openly. Some battles too intense for casual conversation. But tonight we're pulling back the curtain on one of heaven's most classified encounters. If you're ready to discover what really happens when divine justice meets primordial chaos, if you're prepared to witness a battle that makes earthly wars look like children's games, then comment 777 right now. Not just as a number, but as a declaration that you're ready to see beyond the veil. Every 777 is your agreement that some mysteries were meant to be unveiled. Stay close, because what happens next will challenge everything you thought you knew about the spiritual realm. The waters are about to part, and what emerges from the depths will leave you breathless. In the ancient texts that most dare not explore, beyond the familiar passages of Scripture, lies a realm of mystery that few have the courage to enter. Here, in the shadowed margins of divine revelation, we find accounts that were whispered among the earliest believers, stories so profound that they were preserved not in common language, but in the sacred tongues of antiquity. The battle we're about to uncover didn't happen in some distant future tribulation. It occurred in the primordial past, when the boundaries between heaven and earth were still being established. Before mankind drew his first breath, before the garden was planted, before even the stars were set in their courses. This cosmic confrontation shook the very pillars of existence. Picture this moment. The universe is young, still bearing the fresh imprint of divine creation. The heavenly hosts are arranged in perfect order, each angel knowing his place, his purpose, his calling. Among them stands Raguel, whose name means friend of God. But don't let that gentle translation fool you. Raguel is the angel of justice, the one who ensures that divine law is upheld throughout all creation. His appearance is both beautiful and terrifying. Ancient sources describe him as having eyes like burning coals that can see through every deception, every hidden rebellion, every shadow of corruption. His voice carries the authority of thunder, and when he speaks, even the mightiest seraphim pause to listen. His wings span distances that human minds cannot comprehend, and his sword blazes with the fire of divine judgment. But why would such a being need to engage in battle? What could possibly threaten the perfect order of heaven? The answer lies in the depths of the primordial waters, in the chaotic realm that existed before God spoke the words, "Let there be light." Here, in the crushing darkness of the pre-creation void, dwelt something ancient and malevolent, something that predated organized creation itself. Leviathan. The name alone sends tremors through the spiritual realm. This is not the gentle sea creature that modern minds might imagine. This is the embodiment of primordial chaos, a serpentine monster of unimaginable proportions. The ancient texts describe it as having multiple heads, each one capable of swallowing entire mountains. Its scales are like shields of bronze, so tightly joined that no weapon can penetrate them. Its eyes burn like the dawn, and from its mouth come flaming torches. When Leviathan breathes, sparks of fire leap forth. Smoke pours from its nostrils like a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath kindles coals, and flames dart from its mouth. The waters around it boil as if in a cauldron, and the sea churns like a pot of ointment when it moves. But here's what makes this creature truly terrifying. Leviathan isn't just physically massive. It represents something far more dangerous. It embodies the principle of cosmic rebellion against divine order. While Satan would later rebel through pride and ambition, Leviathan's opposition to God is more fundamental. It seeks to return all of creation to the primordial chaos from which it emerged. Imagine the horror of this concept. Everything you see around you, every star in the sky, every breath of air, every heartbeat, every moment of joy or sorrow, all of it returning to the crushing void of nothingness. That is Leviathan's ultimate goal, not just to destroy, but to uncreate. Now you might wonder, why would God allow such a being to exist? The answer reveals something profound about the nature of divine justice and cosmic balance. Every aspect of creation requires its opposite to give it meaning. Light defines darkness. Good defines evil. Order defines chaos. Leviathan serves as the ultimate test of divine authority. But there came a moment when this ancient beast overstepped its boundaries. The exact nature of this transgression is shrouded in mystery. But the ancient sources hint at a terrifying possibility. Leviathan began to corrupt the very foundations of reality itself. The chaotic waters under its influence started seeping into the ordered realms of creation, threatening to unravel everything God had made. It was then that the voice of the Almighty thundered through the heavenly courts with a command that made every angel tremble. Raguel, friend of God, keeper of divine justice, was given a mission that would test even his immense power. He was to descend into the chaotic depths and engage Leviathan in single combat. Can you imagine receiving such a command? To willingly enter the realm of primordial chaos, to face a creature so ancient and powerful that it remembered the first moments of creation. Yet Raguel did not hesitate. Justice demanded action, and he was justice incarnate. The preparation for this battle was unlike anything the heavenly realm had ever witnessed. Raguel didn't simply grab his sword and descend. This confrontation required weapons forged from the very essence of divine authority. His blade was tempered in the fires of the throne room itself, quenched in the tears of the cherubim who wept at the necessity of such violence. His armor was not made of earthly metals, but woven from the fabric of divine law itself. Each piece represented a different aspect of justice. The breastplate bore the weight of every righteous judgment ever rendered. The helmet contained the wisdom needed to discern truth from deception. The shield reflected the perfect balance that maintains all of creation. But perhaps most importantly, Raguel carried with him something that no earthly warrior could possess. He bore the absolute certainty of divine backing. This wasn't a battle of equals. This was the inevitable triumph of order over chaos, of purpose over meaninglessness, of divine will over rebellious opposition. As word of the impending battle spread through the heavenly ranks, an unprecedented gathering began to form. Angels who had never left their assigned posts requested permission to witness this cosmic confrontation. Seraphim who spent eternity in worship paused their songs to focus on the drama about to unfold. Even the mysterious living creatures with their wheels within wheels turned their countless eyes toward the deep. The atmosphere in heaven grew electric with anticipation and dread. Every spiritual being understood the implications of what was about to occur. If Raguel succeeded, divine justice would be vindicated and the order of creation secured. If he failed, well, failure wasn't really an option. The alternative was too catastrophic to contemplate. And then came the moment of descent. Raguel spread his mighty wings and began his journey toward the chaotic depths where Leviathan waited. As he passed through the various levels of creation, each realm fell silent. The stars seemed to dim their light out of respect. The winds ceased their blowing. Even time itself seemed to slow down in anticipation of what was coming. What happened next would shake the very foundations of existence and reveal truths about spiritual warfare that most minds couldn't comprehend. The battle between divine justice and primordial chaos was about to begin, and nothing would ever be the same. The descent took what seemed like eternities, though in the realm beyond time, such measurements hold no meaning. Raguel plunged through layers of reality that human consciousness could never fully grasp. Past the crystalline spheres where the planetary angels maintain their eternal vigil. Beyond the firmament where the waters above are separated from the waters below. Through dimensions where light itself takes on substance and shadow becomes a living thing. As he descended deeper, the very nature of existence began to shift around him. The ordered laws of creation grew thin, stretched to their breaking point. Colors that have no names in any earthly language swirled in impossible patterns. Sounds that could shatter mountains echoed from nowhere and everywhere at once. The deeper he went, the more chaotic everything became. And then, in the crushing depths where even divine light struggles to penetrate, Raguel felt it. A presence so ancient, so malevolent, that every fiber of his angelic being recoiled in recognition of what he was about to face. The water around him began to churn and boil, not from heat, but from the sheer proximity of primordial evil. Leviathan was stirring. The first sign wasn't visual, it was a sound that defied description. Imagine the grinding of tectonic plates mixed with the roar of 1,000 hurricanes, underscored by something that sounded almost like laughter. Mocking, ancient laughter that seemed to say, "You dare disturb my slumber, little angel of light." Then came the movement. The water displaced by Leviathan's awakening created currents so powerful they could have swept away entire solar systems. Whirlpools the size of galaxies formed and dissipated in seconds. The very fabric of space-time rippled like cloth in a cosmic wind. Raguel steadied himself, his grip tightening on his blazing sword. This was the moment he had prepared for, trained for, been created for. Every aspect of his existence had led to this singular confrontation. He was divine justice personified, and justice would not be denied. The first glimpse of Leviathan was almost overwhelming, even for an angel of Raguel's stature. What emerged from the chaotic depths wasn't just large, it was impossibly vast. Its first head alone dwarfed entire mountain ranges. But as more of the creature became visible, Raguel realized he was seeing only a fraction of its true form. 7 heads rose from the churning waters, each one unique in its terrifying majesty. The first bore the aspect of a dragon, its eyes burning like dying stars. The second resembled a great serpent, its fangs dripping with venom that could poison entire oceans. The third was leonine, its mane flowing like liquid fire. Each head represented a different aspect of chaos, a different way that order could be perverted and destroyed. But it was the creature's intelligence that proved most unsettling. This wasn't some mindless beast driven by instinct. Behind those burning eyes lay a consciousness older than creation itself, a mind that had watched the birth of the first star and would gladly witness the death of the last. When Leviathan spoke, its voice was like the sound of continents colliding. The words came not in any earthly language, but in the primordial tongue that existed before God divided the languages at Babel. Yet Raguel understood every syllable, every nuance of meaning. So, the Almighty sends his lapdog to bark at me in the depths, Leviathan rumbled, its multiple heads weaving through the water like serpentine dancers. Do you know who you face, little angel? I am the chaos that existed before your precious order. I am the darkness that your light pretends to banish. I am the void that waits to reclaim everything your God has made. Raguel's response was not in words, but in action. His sword flashed through the water, leaving a trail of divine fire that turned the surrounding chaos into momentary order. The blade struck the scales of Leviathan's nearest head with a sound like thunder, but the ancient creature barely flinched. Its scales, forged in the primordial fires of pre-creation, turned aside the blow as if it were nothing more than a gentle breeze. Leviathan's laughter echoed through the depths, a sound so terrible that it caused reality itself to shudder. Is that all the strength heaven can muster? The beast mocked. I have weathered the birth pangs of creation itself. I have felt the full weight of divine displeasure and remained unbroken. What makes you think one angel, no matter how mighty, can succeed where the very voice of God has chosen to show restraint? It was then that Raguel realized the true nature of this battle. This wasn't just about defeating a rebellious creature. This was about proving that divine justice could triumph over primordial chaos. That order wasn't simply the absence of disorder, but a positive force capable of transforming even the deepest darkness. The angel of justice raised his sword again, but this time, something different happened. The blade began to change, growing brighter, more substantial. Divine authority flowed through it like liquid lightning. This wasn't just Raguel's power anymore. This was the concentrated will of the Almighty channeled through his chosen instrument of justice. When the second blow fell, the entire realm shook. Leviathan's confident laughter died away, replaced by a roar of genuine pain and surprise. One of its mighty scales cracked, then shattered, releasing a fountain of ichor so dark it seemed to absorb light itself. For the first time in eons, Leviathan felt something it had almost forgotten. Fear. The battle that followed defied every law of physics, every understanding of how reality should function. Raguel moved like liquid lightning, his sword carving arcs of divine fire through the chaotic waters. Each strike was perfectly calculated, targeting the weak points in Leviathan's seemingly impenetrable armor. But the ancient beast was far from helpless. Its multiple heads struck with the speed of thought, each attack coming from a different angle, each one carrying enough force to shatter planets. Its tail, thick as a mountain range and covered in spikes that gleamed like obsidian, swept through the water with devastating effect. The conflict raged across multiple dimensions simultaneously. They fought in the physical realm, their battle creating tsunamis in the primordial waters. They fought in the realm of pure thought, each trying to impose their understanding of reality upon the other. They fought in the spiritual dimensions, where concepts like justice and chaos took on physical form and clashed like opposing armies. At one point, Leviathan managed to coil its massive body around Raguel, its crushing grip threatening to extinguish the angel's divine light. But justice cannot be contained by chaos, no matter how ancient or powerful. Raguel's form blazed brighter, his very essence becoming too brilliant for even Leviathan's darkness to contain. The beast loosened its grip with a howl of pain, its multiple heads recoiling from the purifying light. But its retreat was strategic, not defeat. Leviathan was learning, adapting, remembering techniques of warfare older than the stars themselves. "You begin to understand," the creature hissed, its 7 heads weaving hypnotically through the water. "This is not a battle you can win through strength alone. I am not some fallen angel drunk on pride, not some demon to be cast out with a word of power. I am chaos incarnate, and chaos cannot be destroyed, only transformed." The truth of those words hit Raguel like a physical blow. He had been approaching this battle as if it were a conventional conflict, as if victory meant the total destruction of his opponent. But Leviathan was right. Chaos couldn't be destroyed because it was a fundamental aspect of existence itself. Without chaos, there could be no change, no growth, no possibility of choice. The realization changed everything. This wasn't about destroying Leviathan. It was about establishing dominion over it, proving that divine order could channel and direct chaotic forces without being corrupted by them. With this new understanding, Raguel's entire approach shifted. Instead of trying to destroy the beast, he began to fight with a different purpose. Each strike of his sword wasn't meant to kill, but to constrain. Each burst of divine light wasn't intended to banish the darkness, but to define its boundaries. The battle took on a strange, almost ritualistic quality. It became a cosmic dance between opposing forces, each move precisely calculated to maintain the delicate balance between order and chaos that keeps all of creation stable. And in the midst of this impossible conflict, something even more extraordinary began to happen. The watching angels in heaven began to understand truths about the nature of existence that had been hidden since the foundation of the world. They saw that the battle wasn't really between good and evil, but between different aspects of divine wisdom. The confrontation was reaching its climax, and the outcome would determine not just the fate of Leviathan, but the very structure of reality itself. Hours passed, or perhaps millennia. In the depths where Leviathan dwelt, time moved according to different laws, bending and stretching like heated metal under divine pressure. The battle had evolved beyond mere physical combat into something that defied every category of warfare known to heaven or earth. Raguel found himself fighting not just the beast, but the very environment around him. The chaotic waters responded to Leviathan's will, forming whirlpools that tried to drag him deeper into the void. Currents of pure darkness swept through the depths like living shadows, each one attempting to extinguish his divine light. The pressure itself became a weapon, crushing down with the weight of unformed possibilities, of potential realities that had never been allowed to exist. But the angel of justice had advantages that even Leviathan hadn't fully anticipated. His connection to divine order wasn't just a source of power, it was a lifeline to truth itself. No matter how chaotic the environment became, no matter how reality twisted and warped around him, Raguel could always find his center. Justice, after all, is about seeing things as they truly are, not as they appear to be. The turning point came when Leviathan made what it thought would be its masterstroke. The ancient beast began to speak, not in the crude mockery it had used before, but in words of power that predated creation itself. These weren't just sounds. They were fundamental forces given voice. The raw commands that chaos had used to resist divine order from the very beginning. "Let there be confusion," Leviathan intoned, and suddenly Raguel found his perception fracturing. Up became down, light became darkness, purpose became meaninglessness. The very concepts that defined his existence began to blur and merge. "Let there be doubt," the creature continued, and for a terrifying moment, Raguel questioned everything. Was his mission truly just? Was divine order nothing more than cosmic tyranny? Was chaos perhaps the more honest state of existence? "Let there be despair," came the final pronouncement, and with it, a crushing weight of futility descended upon the angel. What was the point of this battle? Even if he won, chaos would always exist. Even if he constrained Leviathan today, the forces of disorder would find new expressions, new ways to challenge divine authority. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, Raguel hung suspended in the depths, his sword arm trembling, his divine fire flickering like a candle in a hurricane. This was the moment Leviathan had been waiting for, the instant when even the most righteous being would crack under the weight of cosmic truth. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of surrendering to despair, Raguel began to laugh. It wasn't the mocking laughter that Leviathan had used earlier. This was something pure, joyful, triumphant. It was the sound of someone who had just understood a joke that the entire universe had been trying to tell. "You almost had me," Raguel said, his voice carrying a warmth that cut through the chaotic waters like sunlight through storm clouds. "For a moment, you almost made me forget the most important truth of all." Leviathan's multiple heads drew back, confusion flickering in its ancient eyes. This wasn't how creatures were supposed to respond to the words of unmaking. This wasn't fear or surrender or even defiant rage. This was something entirely different. "The truth?" the beast rumbled, genuinely curious despite itself. The truth that you exist by divine permission," Raguel replied, his sword blazing brighter than ever. "You speak of chaos as if it were independent, as if disorder could exist without order to define it. But you know better. You've always known. Even your rebellion serves a purpose in the greater plan." The words struck Leviathan like physical blows. Each syllable carried the weight of absolute certainty, the kind of truth that couldn't be argued with or reasoned away. The ancient creature thrashed in the waters, its massive form creating whirlpools that stretched across dimensional barriers. "No!" it roared, all seven heads speaking in unison. "I am the void that existed before creation. I am the darkness that your light fears to touch. I am chaos eternal. You are a creature," Raguel said simply. "Magnificent, terrible, ancient beyond measure, but still a creature, still part of creation, still subject to the same divine will that governs the smallest sparrow." With those words, the nature of the battle shifted one final time. This was no longer about conquest or dominion. This was about recognition, about forcing even the embodiment of chaos to acknowledge its place in the cosmic order. Raguel raised his sword, but the motion was different now. Instead of preparing to strike, he held the blade vertically before him, its divine fire casting light into every corner of the chaotic realm. The light didn't banish the darkness, it gave it definition. It showed where darkness ended and illumination began, creating boundaries that had been missing from this primordial space. "By the authority of the Most High," Raguel declared, his voice echoing across dimensions, I do not destroy you, Leviathan. I do not cast you into oblivion. Instead, I bind you to your proper place in creation. You are chaos constrained, disorder made to serve a greater order, darkness that exists only to give meaning to light. The binding wasn't accomplished through chains of metal or energy. Instead, it was woven from pure concept, from the fundamental laws that govern existence itself. Leviathan found itself unable to move beyond certain boundaries, unable to extend its influence past divinely appointed limits. It could still embody chaos, could still represent the primordial forces of disorder, but only within the cosmic balance that divine wisdom had established. The ancient beast's struggles grew weaker, not because its power was diminished, but because it was beginning to understand something that had been hidden even from its ancient consciousness. Its opposition to divine order hadn't been rebellion at all. It had been service of the highest kind. You see now, Raguel said, his tone gentler but no less authoritative. Every force in creation serves the greater good, even those that seem to oppose it. Your chaos is the canvas upon which divine order paints its masterpieces. Your darkness is the void that gives substance to light. Your disorder is the raw material from which perfect harmony is crafted. Leviathan's multiple heads slowly lowered, not in defeat, but in a kind of cosmic recognition. For the first time since creation began, the beast understood its true purpose. It wasn't the enemy of order, it was order's necessary partner. Without chaos to organize, divine order would be meaningless. Without darkness to illuminate, light would have no context. I remember now, Leviathan whispered, its voice carrying notes of wonder that hadn't been there before. I remember the voice that spoke me into being, the plan that assigned me my role, the eons of opposition, of struggle, of seeming rebellion. It was all part of the greater design. The waters around them began to calm, though they never became still. Chaos, after all, must remain chaotic. But now it was chaos with purpose, disorder that served a greater harmony. The primordial depths still churned with untamed forces, but those forces now moved within boundaries established by divine wisdom. Raguel felt the change ripple through all of creation. In heaven, the watching angels began to understand mysteries that had puzzled them since the foundation of the world. On earth, forces that had seemed random and meaningless suddenly revealed themselves as part of an intricate pattern too vast for mortal comprehension. But the battle, in its truest sense, was just beginning to reveal its deeper implications. The confrontation between Raguel and Leviathan had been the visible manifestation of something far more profound. It was the moment when creation itself came to understand its own nature, when the apparent conflict between order and chaos revealed itself as the fundamental dynamic that keeps all existence in motion. The ancient texts speak of this moment as the Great Binding, but those who truly understand recognize it as the Great Liberation. Leviathan was freed from the burden of meaningless opposition and given the joy of purposeful service. Raguel was freed from the illusion that his role was to destroy chaos and given the deeper mission of harmonizing all forces within divine will. And throughout the cosmic hierarchy, every angel, every principality, every power began to grasp a truth that would reshape their understanding of existence itself. The battle between good and evil that they had thought they were fighting was actually a dance between complementary forces, each one necessary for the full expression of divine wisdom. The implications were staggering, and they were only beginning to unfold. As the cosmic implications of this binding rippled through every dimension of existence, something extraordinary began to unfold in the heavenly realms. The watching angels, who had witnessed this battle with breathless anticipation, suddenly found themselves experiencing revelations that shattered their previous understanding of divine purpose. Michael the archangel, commander of heaven's armies, felt his warrior's heart stirring with new comprehension. For millennia, he had viewed his role through the lens of conquest and victory. Every demon cast down, every rebellion crushed, every force of darkness defeated had seemed like absolute triumph. But now, watching Raguel bind rather than destroy Leviathan, Michael began to understand that even his greatest victories had been part of a more intricate design. The fallen angels he had battled weren't just enemies to be vanquished. They were necessary elements in a cosmic drama that required opposition to reveal the full glory of divine love. Every clash between light and darkness had been orchestrated to demonstrate truths that couldn't be learned any other way. Gabriel, the messenger of God, found his understanding of prophecy transformed in an instant. The visions he had delivered, the warnings he had spoken, the promises he had announced, all of them took on new dimensions of meaning. Prophecy wasn't just about predicting the future. It was about revealing the hidden harmonies that connected every moment of time, showing how apparent chaos would ultimately serve divine purposes. Even the seraphim, those beings of pure worship who spent eternity crying, "Holy, holy, holy," before the throne, discovered new depths in their songs of praise. Their worship wasn't just acknowledgement of divine perfection. It was participation in the fundamental frequency that keeps all creation vibrating in harmony. The cosmic music that transforms chaos into symphony. But perhaps the most profound changes were occurring in realms that few dare to contemplate. In the spaces between dimensions, where the laws of physics bend and reality itself becomes fluid, ancient powers that had slumbered since creation's dawn began to stir with new purpose. These weren't fallen angels or demons in the traditional sense. They were primordial forces, aspects of existence so fundamental that they predated the categories of good and evil. Like Leviathan, they had been assigned roles that seemed oppositional, but were actually essential components of cosmic balance. There was Behemoth, the great land beast whose very existence represented the untamed power of Earth itself. For eons, it had seemed like a force of pure destruction, its movements causing earthquakes, its breath scorching the ground, its presence a constant reminder that nature could not be fully controlled by divine decree. But now, as the binding of Leviathan sent waves of understanding through all creation, Behemoth began to comprehend its true function. It wasn't the enemy of divine order. It was the guardian of creative potential, the keeper of raw power that could be shaped into new forms of beauty and purpose. Deep beneath the foundations of the earth, Behemoth stirred from its ancient rest, not in rebellion, but in recognition. Its massive form, large enough to drink entire rivers without noticing, began to move with new intentionality. Every step it took would now serve to prepare the earth for new growth, new possibilities, new expressions of divine creativity. In the far reaches of space, where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms grow thin, other ancient powers felt the same awakening. The principalities that governed the movements of stars and planets suddenly understood that their vast cosmic dance wasn't separate from the intimate details of individual lives. Every stellar alignment, every gravitational pull, every burst of cosmic radiation was part of an intricate web that connected the largest galactic clusters to the smallest acts of human kindness. The powers that controlled the forces of weather began to see how every storm, every gentle breeze, every drop of rain served purposes that extended far beyond the physical realm. They weren't just maintaining atmospheric balance. They were participating in a spiritual ecosystem where natural phenomena carried messages between heaven and earth. Even time itself seemed to respond to the binding of Leviathan. The linear progression from past to future that mortals experience began to reveal itself as just one layer of a far more complex temporal structure. Past, present, and future weren't separate states, but interconnected dimensions of eternal now, each one influencing and being influenced by the others in ways that defied rational comprehension. In this new understanding, the battle between Raguel and Leviathan took on even greater significance. It wasn't just a single confrontation between order and chaos. It was a template, a pattern that would be repeated throughout history in countless forms, each repetition revealing new aspects of divine wisdom. Every prophet who stood against the corruption of his age was reenacting Raguel's role, binding chaotic forces to divine purpose through the power of truth. Every righteous king who brought order to a lawless land was participating in the same cosmic drama. Every individual who chose light over darkness in the privacy of their own heart was adding their voice to the eternal song that transforms chaos into harmony. But the most stunning revelation was yet to come. As the implications of the binding continued to unfold, it became clear that this pattern would reach its ultimate expression in a future event that would shake all creation. The ancient prophecies spoke of a time when the Lamb would open the sealed book, when hidden mysteries would be revealed, when every knee would bow and every tongue confess. That future moment wouldn't be about conquest in the traditional sense. It would be about the final binding, the ultimate transformation of all chaotic forces into willing servants of divine love. Even Satan himself, the great deceiver, the father of lies, would ultimately serve the purposes of the one who created him. This wasn't universalism in the sense of everyone being saved, regardless of their choices. It was something far more profound. It was the revelation that every choice, even the choice to rebel, would ultimately contribute to the full expression of divine glory. Those who chose darkness would serve as living demonstrations of why light is preferable. Those who chose hatred would reveal the superiority of love. Those who chose destruction would highlight the beauty of creation. The cosmic courtroom where Satan accuses the brethren wasn't a place of genuine conflict. It was a theater where divine justice could be displayed in its fullness. Every accusation hurled by the enemy would ultimately serve to highlight the perfection of divine mercy. Every attempt to destroy would become an opportunity for divine creativity to manifest new forms of beauty. As these revelations cascaded through the heavenly realms, the angels found themselves overwhelmed with worship of a depth and intensity they had never experienced. Their previous praise had been based on partial understanding. Now, seeing the full scope of divine wisdom, their songs took on new harmonies, new melodies, new rhythms that made the music of the spheres itself seem simple by comparison. But even as heaven erupted in unprecedented celebration, the deepest mystery remained hidden. The binding of Leviathan was just the beginning. Greater battles lay ahead, more profound bindings awaited, and the ultimate revelation of divine purpose was still to come. In the depths where Leviathan now rested in its proper place, stirring the primordial waters in patterns that served rather than opposed divine will, ancient eyes looked toward a future that held wonders beyond imagination. The great binding had been accomplished, but the great liberation was just beginning. The battle between Raguel and Leviathan had ended, but the war between order and chaos would continue until the final trumpet sounded and the last mystery was revealed. And when that moment came, even chaos itself would sing Hosanna to the one who sits upon the throne. The most terrifying battle in heaven had concluded not with destruction, but with transformation. Not with victory, but with understanding. Not with the silencing of chaos, but with its consecration to divine service. And in that transformation lay a promise that would echo through eternity. Every force that seemed to oppose divine will would ultimately serve it. Every darkness would give way to light. Every discordant note would find its place in the cosmic symphony. The friend of God had accomplished his mission, but the implications of his victory were only beginning to unfold across the vast expanse of creation. The reverberations of Raguel's triumph didn't remain confined to the celestial realms. Like ripples spreading across the surface of an infinite pond, the binding of Leviathan began to manifest in ways that touched every corner of existence, from the highest heavens to the deepest foundations of reality itself. In the realm of human experience, though mortals couldn't perceive it directly, the effects were immediate and profound. That inexplicable sense of unease that had plagued humanity since the dawn of consciousness, that nagging feeling that something fundamental was out of place in the universe, began to shift. Not disappear entirely, for chaos must remain to give meaning to order, but transform into something else entirely. Artists found themselves inspired with visions they couldn't fully comprehend, painting swirls of color that seemed to capture the very essence of cosmic harmony. Musicians composed melodies that made listeners weep without understanding why, as if their souls were remembering truths their minds had never learned. Writers penned words that carried weight beyond their literal meaning, sentences that seemed to vibrate with the same frequency as creation itself. But it wasn't just the creative souls who felt the change. In laboratories around the world, scientists began making discoveries that bridged the gap between the physical and metaphysical in ways that defied conventional understanding. Quantum physicists found patterns in particle behavior that suggested consciousness at the most fundamental level of reality. Astronomers detected cosmic background radiation that seemed to pulse with rhythmic intention rather than random noise. Even in the darkest corners of human experience, where suffering and injustice had seemed to reign unchallenged, subtle transformations began to occur. Pain didn't disappear, but it started revealing purposes that had been hidden. Tragedy didn't cease, but it began to unveil meanings that transcended individual loss. The harsh realities of existence remained harsh, but they started to serve as instruments in a symphony too vast for mortal comprehension. Meanwhile, in the spiritual dimensions that overlap our physical world, the binding of Leviathan had triggered what could only be described as a cosmic reorganization. Demonic hierarchies that had operated according to principles of pure opposition suddenly found themselves constrained by new limitations they couldn't understand. Their rebellion hadn't been curtailed, but it had been redirected, channeled into patterns that served purposes they couldn't perceive. The prince of the power of the air discovered that every lie he whispered into human hearts would ultimately serve to highlight the beauty of truth. The spirits of deception found that their false narratives would eventually collapse under the weight of reality, leaving observers with a deeper appreciation for authentic wisdom. Even the most malevolent entities realized that their very existence had become a testimony to the superiority of divine love. This didn't make them any less dangerous, or their influence any less real. Evil remained evil, darkness remained darkness, and the spiritual warfare that rages around every human soul continued with undiminished intensity. But now there was a difference. The war had rules, boundaries, ultimate purposes that even the forces of darkness couldn't escape. In the ancient texts that few scholars dare to study, cryptic references to this cosmic binding appear in fragments and shadows. The Book of Job mentions Leviathan in ways that seem almost casual, as if the writer assumed his readers would understand references to cosmic forces that modern minds can barely grasp. The Psalms speak of God crushing the heads of Leviathan and giving its flesh as food to the creatures of the wilderness, imagery that takes on startling new meaning in light of Raguel's binding. But perhaps the most intriguing references appear in the prophetic literature, where visions of the end times consistently return to themes of cosmic order being established through apparent conflict. The beasts that rise from the sea, the dragons that wage war against the saints, the forces of chaos that seem to threaten the very foundations of divine rule. All of these take on new significance when viewed through the lens of the Great Binding. These aren't just future events to be feared or avoided. They're the final acts in a cosmic drama, where every force of opposition will ultimately serve to reveal the full glory of divine wisdom. The beast that demands worship will highlight the superiority of true devotion. The false prophet who deceives the nations will demonstrate the priceless value of authentic truth. Even the lake of fire itself will serve as a testament to the justice that maintains cosmic order. Back in the primordial depths where Leviathan now rested in its proper place, the ancient creature had begun to understand aspects of its own nature that had been hidden even from its vast consciousness. The rebellion it had embodied for eons hadn't been meaningless opposition. It had been a necessary force that allowed divine patience to be demonstrated, divine mercy to be revealed, divine justice to be displayed in its fullness. Every thrash of its mighty tail now stirred the waters in patterns that served creative rather than destructive purposes. The chaotic currents it generated became the raw material from which new forms of order could emerge. Its very breath, once a force of corruption and decay, now carried seeds of transformation that would bloom in ways beyond imagination. The 7 heads that had once spoken words of unmaking now found themselves capable of new forms of expression. Not praise in the conventional sense, for Leviathan remained the embodiment of chaos, but something deeper and more complex. A kind of acknowledgement that even opposition could be a form of service when properly understood and channeled. Raguel, meanwhile, had not simply departed after accomplishing his binding. The angel of justice remained in the depths, not as a jailer watching over a prisoner, but as a conductor guiding a cosmic orchestra. His presence ensured that the chaotic forces would continue to serve their proper function without overstepping the boundaries that divine wisdom had established. From his position in the primordial realm, Raguel could perceive the vast network of cause and effect that connected every action in creation. He saw how a single butterfly's wing beat in one dimension could trigger avalanches of consequence across multiple planes of existence. He understood how individual human choices rippled through the spiritual realms, creating waves that would influence events for generations to come. But most importantly, he began to glimpse the ultimate purpose toward which all of creation was moving. The binding of Leviathan hadn't been an end in itself. It had been preparation for something even more magnificent, a final revelation that would justify every moment of apparent chaos, every instance of seeming injustice, every tear shed by the innocent, and every victory claimed by the wicked. In the councils of heaven, discussions had begun about the next phase of the eternal plan. The binding of primordial chaos had been accomplished, but other ancient powers still awaited their moments of transformation. Forces that had operated in shadows since the foundation of the world were stirring, preparing for their own encounters with divine justice. Somewhere in the forgotten corners of creation, entities whose names were known only to the Most High were beginning to sense the approaching hour of their own binding. Not destruction, for that would serve no ultimate purpose, but transformation into willing servants of the very will they had opposed since time began. The seraphim around the throne had begun incorporating new verses into their eternal song, harmonies that acknowledged the role of chaos in highlighting the beauty of order. The cherubim who guarded the way to the tree of life found their vigil taking on new meaning as they realized they weren't just preventing access to something precious, but preparing for a time when that access would be freely granted to all who had been purified by the fire of divine love. Even the mysterious living creatures with their wheels within wheels and eyes covering every surface discovered new depths to their eternal motion. They weren't just maintaining the cosmic machinery. They were participating in a dance of such complexity and beauty that mortal minds couldn't begin to comprehend its steps. And in the heart of it all, seated upon the throne that exists beyond time and space, the Ancient of Days smiled with satisfaction that was both eternal and momentary. The binding of Leviathan had been foreseen from before the foundation of the world, planned with precision that accounted for every variable, executed with timing that was absolutely perfect. But this was just one note in a symphony that would continue playing until every force in creation had found its proper place in the cosmic harmony. The most terrifying battle in heaven had concluded, but greater wonders lay ahead. The friend of God had proven that divine justice could triumph over primordial chaos, not through destruction, but through transformation. And in that proof lay the promise of even greater victories to come, battles where mercy would triumph over judgment, where love would conquer fear, where light would not simply banish darkness, but transform it into new forms of illumination. The ancient war between order and chaos had entered a new phase, one where apparent opposition would serve ultimate harmony, where every conflict would contribute to final peace, where even the forces of destruction would become instruments of creation. The binding was complete, but the liberation had only just begun. As the cosmic symphony reached this unprecedented crescendo, something entirely unexpected began to unfold in the realm where Raguel maintained his vigil over the bound Leviathan. The primordial waters, now flowing in patterns that served rather than opposed divine will, began to reveal secrets that had been hidden since before the first star ignited. Deep within the chaotic currents, Raguel's enhanced perception detected movement that didn't belong to Leviathan's restrained thrashing. Something else stirred in the depths, something that had been waiting, watching, biding its time while the great binding unfolded above. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a distortion in the water, a trick of perception caused by the interplay of divine light and primordial darkness. But as Raguel focused his attention on the anomaly, the truth became horrifyingly clear. There was another presence in the depths, something that predated even Leviathan's ancient consciousness. The realization struck the angel of justice like a physical blow. In all his preparation for this confrontation, in all the divine wisdom that had guided his mission, there had been no mention of a second entity. The binding of Leviathan was supposed to be the culmination of cosmic order's triumph over primordial chaos. But now it appeared that the battle had merely awakened something even older, even more fundamental to the fabric of existence itself. This new presence didn't announce itself with the dramatic flair that had characterized Leviathan's awakening. There were no roars that shook dimensions, no displays of raw power that bent reality around their force. Instead, there was something far more unsettling, a complete absence that somehow managed to be more present than presence itself. Imagine trying to perceive something that existed in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats, in the silence that makes sound possible. This entity dwelt in the void that gave meaning to existence, the nothingness that made somethingness comprehensible. It was, in the most literal sense, the embodiment of the gap between being and non-being. Raguel felt his divine nature recoil from this presence, not out of fear, but out of a kind of cosmic vertigo. How do you confront something that isn't there? How do you bind something that exists only as the absence of everything else? His sword, blazing with the fire of divine justice, seemed suddenly inadequate for a battle that might not involve conflict in any recognizable sense. But even as these thoughts raced through his consciousness, Raguel began to understand that this encounter had been anticipated. Not by him, not by the heavenly councils he served, but by the divine wisdom that orchestrated all things. The binding of Leviathan hadn't been the end of the mission. It had been preparation for something infinitely more subtle and profound. The presence in the void began to communicate, not through words or concepts, but through the manipulation of absence itself. Where Leviathan had spoken with the voice of primordial chaos, this entity communicated through the silence that exists before the first word is spoken. Its message came not as sound, but as the space where sound would exist if it chose to manifest. What it conveyed was both simple and incomprehensible. It was the keeper of potential, the guardian of all the possibilities that had never been actualized. Every choice not made, every path not taken, every reality that could have existed but didn't, all of these dwelt within its non-being. It was the repository of the infinite alternatives that divine wisdom had chosen not to manifest. And now, stirred by the binding of chaos, it had awakened to question why those other possibilities had been rejected. Why had the divine will chosen this particular expression of creation over the countless alternatives that could have existed? What made this reality more worthy than all the others that remained locked in potential? The implications were staggering. This wasn't just another cosmic entity to be bound or transformed. This was a fundamental aspect of divine creativity itself, the shadow cast by every act of creation, the acknowledgement that choosing one reality meant rejecting infinite others. To bind this presence would be to eliminate the very concept of choice. To leave it unbound might mean the dissolution of all that had been chosen into the chaos of unlimited possibility. Raguel found himself facing a paradox that stretched his understanding to its breaking point. Divine justice demanded that all things serve their proper purpose, but what was the proper purpose of unrealized potential? How do you bring order to something that exists precisely as the alternative to order? As he wrestled with these questions, the bound Leviathan began to stir with new agitation. The ancient chaos beast seemed to sense the presence of this even more primordial entity, and for the first time since its binding, showed signs of genuine distress. The creature that had embodied opposition to divine order was now confronted with something that questioned the very basis of order itself. Do you feel it, angel of justice? Leviathan's voice carried notes of awe and terror that hadn't been there before. Do you sense what has awakened in the deeper depths? I am chaos. But this is the void that exists before chaos can even be conceived. I am the opposition to your order. But this entity questions why there should be anything to oppose at all. The water around them began to behave in ways that defied even the flexible laws of the primordial realm. Currents flowed backward through time. Whirlpools spun in directions that had no names, and waves crashed against shores that existed in parallel dimensions. The very fabric of space-time began to fray as the presence of unrealized potential started to bleed into actualized reality. Raguel realized that he was witnessing something that had never happened before in all the eons of creation. The boundary between what was and what could have been was beginning to dissolve. If this process continued, not only would his mission fail, but the entire structure of existence might collapse into a formless soup of competing possibilities. Yet even as this crisis unfolded, the angel of justice began to perceive a deeper pattern at work. The awakening of this presence wasn't an accident or an unforeseen consequence of binding Leviathan. It was part of a plan so vast and intricate that even his enhanced understanding could barely grasp its edges. The divine wisdom that had orchestrated the binding of chaos had also anticipated the need to address the question of unrealized potential. Every choice made in love creates alternatives that must be acknowledged, honored, and ultimately reconciled with the chosen path. The entity stirring in the void wasn't an enemy to be defeated, but a cosmic question that demanded an answer. But what kind of answer could satisfy something that embodied all the roads not taken? How do you justify a chosen reality to the infinite alternatives that were sacrificed to create it? The magnitude of this challenge made the binding of Leviathan seem like child's play by comparison. As Raguel contemplated the seemingly impossible task before him, he became aware of other stirrings throughout the cosmic hierarchy. This wasn't just his battle to fight. The awakening of unrealized potential was sending shockwaves through every level of existence, forcing every conscious being to confront the weight of choices made and alternatives forsaken. In heaven, angels who had served faithfully for millennia suddenly found themselves wondering about the paths they hadn't taken, the roles they hadn't chosen, the aspects of divine service they had never explored. The certainty that had characterized their existence began to waver as they contemplated the infinite other ways they could have expressed their devotion. On earth, sensitive souls began experiencing dreams of lives they had never lived, relationships they had never formed, destinies they had never pursued. Artists found themselves paralyzed by the awareness of all the masterpieces they would never create. Scientists became overwhelmed by the infinite questions they would never have time to investigate. Every human being, in some deep part of their consciousness, began to feel the weight of all their unchosen possibilities. But perhaps most significantly, the presence of unrealized potential was forcing a confrontation with the ultimate question that had lurked at the heart of existence since the first moment of creation. Why had the divine will chosen to create it all? What made the reality of existence preferable to the perfect peace of eternal non-being? This question cut deeper than any rebellion, challenged divine authority more fundamentally than any chaotic uprising. It demanded not just submission or binding, but justification. It required the divine wisdom to account for itself in ways that had never been necessary before. And in the depths where Raguel maintained his vigil, the angel of justice began to understand that his mission was evolving into something unprecedented. He wasn't just binding chaotic forces to divine will. He was being called to participate in creation's ultimate act of self-understanding, the moment when existence itself would have to justify its own reality. The battle that had begun with Leviathan was revealing itself as merely the opening movement in a cosmic symphony of unimaginable complexity. Forces were stirring that would require not just the intervention of individual angels, but the coordinated response of all creation working in harmony. The most terrifying battle in heaven was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to reveal its true scope and purpose. What lay ahead would test not just the power of divine justice, but the very foundations of why anything exists at all. And in the face of such ultimate questions, even the mightiest angel could only wait for wisdom beyond his own understanding to provide the answers that would determine the fate of all reality. As the weight of these cosmic implications settled upon Raguel's consciousness, something unprecedented began to occur in the deepest recesses of his angelic nature. For the first time since his creation, the friend of God found himself experiencing something that mortal beings would recognize as doubt. Not doubt about divine goodness or ultimate wisdom, but doubt about his own capacity to comprehend the magnitude of what was unfolding before him. The entity of unrealized potential continued its silent communion, and with each passing moment, Raguel felt the boundaries of his understanding stretch beyond their breaking point. He was witnessing the emergence of a force that existed in the gaps between certainty, in the spaces where even divine knowledge acknowledged its own mysteries. But then, cutting through the existential vertigo like a blade of pure clarity, came a voice that Raguel had heard only once before in all his eons of existence. It was the voice that had spoken light into being, that had separated the waters from the waters, that had breathed life into dust and called it very good. "My friend," the voice whispered, and every molecule of chaotic water around them stilled to perfect silence. "Do you understand now why I chose you for this task?" The question struck Raguel with the force of revelation. He had assumed his selection was based on his role as the angel of justice, his capacity to bring order from chaos, his unwavering commitment to divine law. But now he began to perceive deeper layers of purpose woven into his calling. "You were chosen not because you could bind chaos," the voice continued, "but because you could embrace mystery. Not because you possessed all the answers, but because you could stand in the presence of ultimate questions without losing faith in ultimate love." As these words penetrated his consciousness, Raguel felt a transformation beginning within his own nature. The rigid certainty that had characterized his existence was giving way to something far more profound, a kind of flexible strength that could bend without breaking, a justice that could acknowledge complexity without abandoning truth. The presence of unrealized potential seemed to sense this shift, and its communication took on new qualities. Instead of challenging the validity of chosen reality, it began to explore the possibility of harmony between what was and what could have been. The void that contained all alternatives wasn't necessarily opposed to actualized creation. Perhaps it could serve as the eternal reminder of the preciousness of choice itself. Leviathan, still bound, but now watching this exchange with ancient eyes full of wonder, began to understand its own role in this larger drama. Its chaos wasn't just the raw material from which order was crafted. It was the active principle that kept reality dynamic, that prevented the crystallization of existence into static perfection. "Even I serve a purpose beyond opposition," the great beast rumbled, its voice carrying new harmonics of comprehension. "My thrashing keeps the waters moving, prevents stagnation, ensures that creation remains alive rather than merely ordered." But the entity of unrealized potential remained silent, its communication shifting into frequencies that existed beyond sound, beyond thought, beyond the normal categories of angelic perception. It was showing Raguel visions of what creation looked like from the perspective of infinite possibility. He saw reality not as a single chosen path, but as a vast tree with countless branches, each one representing a different potential outcome. The trunk was divine will, unchanging and eternal, but the branches were the infinite ways that will could be expressed, and every choice made by every conscious being caused new branches to sprout, while others faded into mere potential. From this perspective, the binding of chaos wasn't about eliminating alternatives. It was about establishing a framework within which infinite creativity could flourish without destroying itself. Order wasn't the opposite of possibility, but its enabler, the structure that made meaningful choice possible. The vision expanded, and Raguel found himself perceiving the entire cosmic drama from a vantage point that existed outside time and space. He saw how every battle between order and chaos, every conflict between good and evil, every choice between light and darkness contributed to the ongoing creation of something unprecedented in the history of eternity. Creation wasn't a finished product that had been completed in 6 days and then maintained unchanged. It was a living, growing, evolving expression of divine creativity that incorporated every choice, every struggle, every triumph and defeat into an ever-expanding masterpiece of incomprehensible beauty. Even the unrealized possibilities weren't wasted or forgotten. They existed in a state of eternal potential, ready to be drawn upon whenever new branches of reality needed to sprout. The entity he faced wasn't the enemy of actualized creation, but its eternal partner, the reservoir of infinite creativity that ensured the divine imagination would never be exhausted. As this understanding flooded through his consciousness, Raguel felt the final piece of his mission clicking into place. He wasn't just binding chaos to order. He was facilitating the marriage between actuality and possibility, ensuring that reality would remain forever creative, forever capable of new expressions of beauty and meaning. The binding he would perform on this entity wouldn't constrain it, but consecrate it, transforming it from a source of existential doubt into a wellspring of eternal hope. Every question it raised about why things were as they were would become an invitation to explore new ways they could become. And so, the most terrifying battle in heaven reached its true conclusion, not with the clash of sword against scale, but with the recognition that terror itself had been transformed into wonder. Raguel, the friend of God, had accomplished something far greater than binding primordial chaos. He had revealed the hidden harmony that existed between order and disorder, between what is and what could be, between the certainty of divine will and the infinite creativity of eternal possibility. The depths still churn with ancient power, but now that power serves a purpose beyond opposition. Every force that once seemed to threaten creation has been woven into the grand tapestry of divine wisdom, proving that in the end, even the most terrifying battles are simply acts of love disguised as conflict.